Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Conference Chair of National Ergo and Ergo Expo, Dr. Alan Hedge.
Thank you. I have our keynote this morning standing next to me, really to save time and just to show that she's still talking to me, and you'll understand why in a moment. Let me introduce this morning's session. Let me first of all thank the sponsors, OM Seating and Ergocentric. They were platinum sponsors, and also the supporting sponsor, Kensington. It takes a lot of hard work to put on any kind of conference, particularly one like this with so much variety in the conference, and the sponsorship really helps with that. So we hope that you found their exhibits to be interesting. Give them some feedback. I mean, seriously, it doesn't have to necessarily be great feedback. If you thought something could be improved, they want to hear that because they, like all of us, want to do the best they can do. So, and hopefully we're coming back and growing the sponsorship so that next year's conference, which will be in Nashville, may have even more people. And maybe even some music, so, right. Continuing education, those of you who need a certificate of attendance, that's available for download today from the mobile app. So this morning you should be able to do that. You can apply that for any credits that you need with whatever organization may require those. If you have any issues with that, then you can always contact me or contact Matt, and we'll try and help on that. You'll also be getting an email today from us asking about the conference. What did you like? What didn't work so well? Try and think of, things you would like to see there. What would help improve this? What would be issues that might be more relevant to you, your industry, or things you think that other people might be interested in? In part, we are kind of restricted on what we can present because it depends what people submit. And if people don't submit things on a topic, it's kind of hard for us to present that. So the feedback is really important. And let us also know what you thought of the venue, the expo, the food, your winnings at Vegas, and be prepared to share some of those with us. Okay, so I want to now introduce our keynote speaker this morning, who is standing next to me for a very good reason. Marisol did her graduate training with me, so she did a master's degree at Cornell, and this is to prove that she's still speaking to me. Because as a person's chairperson, sometimes we never had any disagreements, but sometimes opinions can differ, and I fortunately have never really had that, but I've seen colleagues have that kind of experience where students have said, that was the worst ever. She may say that in private, but at least in public, she's prepared to stand up here with me. So that's where Marisol started in her journey in ergonomics. Since that time, she's done a considerable amount of work in a variety of locations. I'm going to read just a very short intro here in reverse. So she started at Cornell. She then moved to Toyota, and she can tell you about that, where she established a safety innovation team. And since then, she has spent her career in various locations. She's been at Liberty Mutual, doing ergonomics initiatives with Liberty Mutual folks, Amazon Web Services. I don't know if you still continue with Toyota, but I drive a Toyota, and it's because Marisol said they're good. She's right. She's great. So she's dedicated her career to ergonomics. She's the co-founder of the board of directors of both Wearable Robotics Association and the Automotive Exoskeleton Group, so a lot of expertise in those areas. She also serves the co-chair of the Applied Ergonomics Conference, which I'm sure some of you think of that as maybe it's a competing conference. It's not really. We address slightly different areas, slightly different audiences at different times of year. We don't duplicate each other's efforts, and we are not competing with each other. We're all trying to advance the field of ergonomics. And the greatest thing is, with all the success that Marisol has had and will have in the future, she does still talk to me. So thank you very much, and let me introduce Marisol. Please welcome Marisol.
Thank you, Alan. Hey, everyone. Testing my mic. Can you hear me? It's on? Cool. I was told I might have some hair interference, apparently, so hopefully I will be okay. So, first of all, I am on the advisory board for this conference this year, so really on behalf of the entire board, thank you so much for being here at 8:30 a.m. on the last day of the conference. I know it's a tendency to stay out late and have fun in Vegas. I actually did the same last night and had to force my way back to the hotel. I do have a keynote tomorrow, so thank you so much for being here so early. And I do really like Alan. Thank you so much for inviting me to this. So it's true. Actually, I probably wouldn't be in the field of ergonomics without Alan. I actually went to Cornell for my master's in another related area in the same department. Gary Evans, environmental psychology, and Alan ended up being my advisor. So, and that was my entry into ergonomics. So it's, a lot of people fall into it. I did as well. So just a little bit about where I'm coming from, right? So Alan already gave the introduction, but these four squares are sort of, and the logos and such are the things that have shaped me over the years. So again, went to Cornell. I was a psychology major, so I was at Cornell as well as an undergrad as a psychology major, and I planned to be a clinical psychologist, actually. I spent a year doing that. I went to a PhD program to be a clinical psychologist until I realized I didn't want to do that, and then went back to Cornell for, working with Alan. But the person, the user, the psychology of things is really interesting to me. I've been a certified professional ergonomist since 2006, and then a few different places have shaped my career. I worked for a product design firm really early on after grad school, and that didn't really work out. So I ended up at NIOSH, which is the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, and that really got me into the occupational side of ergonomics. And then from there, I did some consulting in the insurance world. I worked for Human Tech for a little while too, and then I went on to Toyota for 15 years. So that's actually where I would say I really developed my knowledge and expertise and actual, industry-based perspective at Toyota, and it was, definitely a great experience. And then after that, I went on to AWS to start an ergonomics program there. Took that industry knowledge to Liberty Mutual to support customers and such, and then it wasn't what I really wanted to do. I really missed being in industry, to be honest. So then I've switched over to Vibrance. I'm really involved in external stuff, so I like to stay in the know in terms of what's happening and such. So, exoskeletons, all the innovations and such. So I'm part of a lot of those groups and pretty involved, so that I can really bring the latest and the greatest and support a lot of the emerging innovations. So Vibrance. Just a little bit about Vibrance, because you may not have heard about it. I didn't hear about it. I actually started there in August, but I was intrigued by the fact that they had a role for ergonomics, for global ergonomics manager. I was like, really? And I've never even heard of this company. But it turns out it's a global chemical company. The name itself has only been around for a couple of years. They brought in all these different companies that had been existing for 100 years. But it's very diversified in terms of pigments and all sorts of different chemical and advanced materials. And it's global, 60-something sites around the world with 11,000 customers. So it's a little bit, Vibrant stuff is a little bit everywhere. So whether it's hybrid batteries, whether it's even cow feed. So sometimes, if you've had a Corona here in Las Vegas, a beer, right? The way that they create that logo with the paint, that's using Vibrance materials. So, paints and buildings and such. So it's a little bit everywhere. So it was kind of interesting to me, kind of coming into the chemical industry and not really knowing that much, quite honestly. So another thing about me, it's my birthday today. And this slide is really there so I can get some maybe free drinks or something when I come off the podium, but no, really, I think, my true gift is, being able, I know it sounds cheesy, but being able to share my story and my information with you today. So for sure, when do you get to give a keynote on your birthday? So this will probably never repeat itself in my lifetime, right? So, but of course, material gifts are good too if you guys, decide to, when I step off. But so when you do this type of talk on your birthday, so Alan asked me back in February, I believe. So I mean, it's been a while, and you're like, oh, and I didn't know at the time that it was going to be on my actual birthday, but I knew it was going to be my birthday week. So you start being really kind of introspective, and you start thinking about, what do you want to say? Like, you've got this podium, like, what do you want to do? And it's really sort of important to deliver a good message. It's somewhat amplified by the fact that it's your birthday somehow, So sort of around that time, I was reading this book, and it's The Worlds I See by Dr. Fei-Fei Li, about AI. So if you don't know Fei-Fei Li, you should, because a lot of the stuff that we're talking about today really rests on her shoulders. So she was the creator of ImageNet. So that was the data set that made essentially computer vision possible in the 2010s. So a lot of the stuff that we're talking about today is really resting on her shoulders. She's a Chinese-American scientist. This book, it's not really about AI, as in technical. There's some technical stuff that, again, I'm not an AI person, so I kind of like skip over a little bit. But it's really about her story and how she pictures AI. So all the challenges that she faced when she came to this country as a teenager and all that. So a lot of that resonated with me, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. And then I just really decided to take a lot of the learnings in her book and apply it to this keynote so I could deliver an effective message. So the reason of my identification, so again, kind of sharing some personal stuff, and as much as I present elsewhere, I never really share this, so you guys are cool. So, I'm an immigrant myself, so I was actually, and I know it's something not a lot of people know, but I was born in Cuba. And my family all goes back to Spain, but I lived in Spain for a year when I turned 6 years old in Spain. Spanish was my first language. It's probably not my best language right now because I never went to school in it, but we moved to the United States when I was 6 years old. So again, kind of identifying with Dr. Lee, and definitely, faced some challenges, right? So my father was an accountant in Cuba, so a professional, but when we came to the U.S., he didn't really know English very well, right? So he and my mom, so again, they were sort of in the kind of like production factory realm of things, right? And although I've never said like, I want to be an ergonomist because I want to improve jobs like that, but maybe upon some psychoanalysis of some type, that might emerge in terms of trying to fix a lot of those, situations that maybe my parents were in. So I know, big hair, chubby cheeks, so this is, kind of embarrassing to show almost, but this was me as my teens. I was in dance. I was totally not techie. So I didn't have a techie bone in my body, again, just more like creative dramatics and dance. I did that for like 10 years. So just kind of showing you that kind of anything is possible with regards to going into this realm of things. So totally not techie. Like I talked about before, so here's a picture of Alan, so you can see what he looked like in 2000, I think it's 2000, 2001. When I got my master's. So again, like I told you earlier, psych major, and then went through the whole arduous process of applying to graduate schools in clinical psychology for it to just leave like a year in. But again, just I didn't even have a computer, like a desktop. In college, I had a word processor. Like I would write papers. I'm like, why do I need to get a computer? Like a desktop at the time, because I'm like, I'm just going to use it for papers, write papers. So I can do the same with a word processor. And then even in, I think my first desktop computer, I was in Pace University for the clinical psych program. And even then, and this is like in my early 20s, and even then, the only thing I used it for was to write papers. So again, totally not a techie background, but that, again, started changing over the years, and I started getting more involved. So this is a lot of stuff thrown in here, but this is sort of my technology journey. So when I was at Toyota, I was trying to solve a problem, the overhead work in the chassis line, right? No matter what we did in terms of improving the processes, we couldn't get rid of the fact that the carrier was moving overhead, right? Just overhead carrier. You can't just take a car and switch it around. It's got to be built that way. So if you're thinking, why don't you just move the vehicle, right? Which is an obvious question. It's not that simple to do. The structure of the vehicle has to be designed that way to begin with. So you have to it's like a whole architecture change. So we were trying to solve that particular problem and started looking at exoskeletons in 2017, 2016 or so when they started. The shoulder ones kind of came first. So, so that was pretty cool. Many years, several years, I was 2 to 3 years in development. So at Toyota in 2019, we were actually the first company to require the usage of any type of exoskeleton. It was shoulder exoskeleton at the time for safety reasons. So we had this whole process. I presented a lot about that in the past, but that was sort of my pathway into the tech, right? So being aware of that, I started attending a lot of other events, in particular the Enterprise Wearables Technology Summit, which is today actually called a different name. It's called the Augmented Enterprise Summit. And funny enough, it's actually taking place this week, like right now, as I speak, in Dallas. But that got me into a lot of the other areas of technology. So the first time I attended was 2018. And they were talking about virtual reality, augmented reality, IoT. I was like, IoT? What, like Internet of Things, right? These people, they're, tech people. And I didn't know what they were talking about half the time. But I was so intrigued with everything that I started learning more and kind of, I came back to Toyota. I pitched the concept of, hey, there's all this stuff out there. How do we bring this and really enhance safety with all this tech that's coming along, right? So after maybe about a year of discussing, they actually allowed me to form a safety innovations group. Then I was able to hire some people and trial a lot of different things. So one of the things that we trialed, and actually this is my roadmap there in terms of things to trial, right? I didn't realize the significance of it at the time, but even before the Exos, it was about 2015 or so, there were a couple of researchers at the University of Michigan that were using computer vision for the first time to look at posture. So Toyota and my group, we got a chance to fund their studies for 3 years and actually develop an internal Toyota app that, a very basic version of the ones that you have today, right? But sort of a first of its kind. And one of those professors ended up, of course, forming the company Kinetica, which then worked with Velocity HS and sort of resulted in the first really usable, feasible computer vision ergonomics app in 2018. So that was pretty cool to kind of work in that area. Another project that I had at Toyota was the one that I called the intelligent plant concept, which was basically trying to use AI and different models to bring together 3 sets of otherwise siloed information. And we had these programmers that they knew nothing about safety and ergonomics. They're like, what is an MSD? They had no idea, but they felt really good working on something that was safety and more human related than they were used to. And honestly, it fell a little flat because their main conclusion after joining these vast sets of data was that MSDs were going to be more likely than non-MSDs, right? And we were like, yeah, we kind of know that. It's automotive, right? And it's 60-second cycle time. So yeah, that's it's like a duh moment, But we're able to kind of show a lot of that and sort of introduce AI into the organization. But really at the end of it, it's like the old adage, garbage in, garbage out, right? We realized that the systems that we were looking at, those 3 systems that we were trying to bring together didn't really have the best data, right? So out comes the not so usable data. So it's a little bit of my background. I gave my first keynote was at an Applied Ergonomics conference in 2018. So, and that one was, disrupting ergonomics. I was talking about computer vision and exoskeletons emerging and what it was going to do to the practice. So I kind of see this as sort of like my part 2, I guess, of this, 6 years later, which is scary that it's 6 years later. But so a little bit about, where I'm coming from. I'm a user. I'm not an academic, I'm not a researcher, I'm not, a developer, I'm not a scientist in that sense, but I'm really like a lot of you folks in terms of how do I apply these different technologies and stuff. So as you can see kind of here from this image, I really think it's gonna be sort of a collaboration between the two as we move forward. And not just it will be, it must be, right? So we must all shape it that way. It's not, we shouldn't be passive observers, kind of just taking what comes along. We really need to shape it as we move along. So I think you all know what AI is by now, so I won't read that. But Alan taught us a lot of different terms in his keynote yesterday, so that's super awesome. But so you guys know what that is. Machine learning is how we get to it. So the training method for artificial intelligence, right? The different tools such as artificial neural network and all these different models that we use to train the AI. Because you train AI, you don't program AI like the old days with like robots and software and such. So a couple of things to consider. I know we tend to think of AI as AI, right? There's like a huge amount of differences within AI, and I don't even claim to really skim the top of the iceberg with my knowledge. But a couple of things that we should be aware of is traditional AI, right? So that is something that excels at analyzing and automating. So if you guys have your current versions of Siri or Alexa, right? Alexa at home drives me crazy because I ask like a simple question and like out comes like a little bit of trash, And it's like, no, that is not what I asked for at all. So those are signs, and of course that's being updated, I'm sure, by Amazon and such. But that's an example of just more traditional AI. And then the thing that's really come about in the last a couple years or so is generative AI. So generative AI really excels at the generation of new creative content using previous data sets as a guide. So that is why when you put your question into ChatGPT, you actually get, or the voice interaction, it actually sounds like a person. It doesn't sound like Alexa and Siri and all that. So it's more the generative AI. So that's really gonna move everything forward, in my opinion. Of course, generative AI is trained on existing data. So you have to be really careful about, bias for sure, and a term that's called hallucinations, which is basically inaccurate information generated by that type of system. So a lot of things, so we're hinging all this information on the stuff that's already available, right? And is there bias there? Absolutely. So back in 2020, remember like COVID, like every conference turns virtual and all that. And I was really in the heyday of like exploring AI. So I was able to attend this virtual AI summit and just took it all in, learned so much. So at the time, this is like sort of the image that really helped me to absorb the difference. And this might be more obvious now, but maybe it wasn't in 2020, right? Sort of the journey that we've all been on. So pre-tech, right? So that's back in the day, humans not optional, paper and ink, that type of thing. And then going into software. So again, being able to like program the software, sort of limited capabilities. You can automate repetitive prescribed tasks with humans. So again, you program it. And then the trajectory that we're going in is AI, where human reasoning really begins to be automated. And again, we train the software and humans, coexist with machines, or, some may think humans are optional, right? So as a side note, I think like the world's preeminent AI scientists actually estimate like a 5% chance that AI will result in human annihilation. But it's only 5%, so keep that in mind. It's really, really small. So this was, again, this was back in 2020, right? And it's scary how all this has kind of moved along. So in 2020, the realm was retail, right? Like it was all evolving, retail, and then it went to like entertainment, all that stuff. And then they said in the next 10 years, it's gonna be targeted applications with medicine, legal, et cetera. And then 10 years beyond that, it's gonna be the human mimicry, right? Like you behave, sound like humans. And then beyond that, human consciousness, which is lots of question marks what that even means, right? So that was sort of the predicted growth in 2020, but the interesting and somewhat scary yet exciting part is that hasn't it all like totally moved along? I mean, it's been less than 10 years since 2020, and we're in the like human mimicry phase, right? So like we're developing that. So it's exciting and it's disturbing at the same time. So, and part of this keynote is really sort of like to scare you a little bit, somewhat into action in terms of really getting involved with AI. But like I said, retail was really AI's first triumph, right? So even years ago, Amazon was reporting that a huge percent of their revenue on their web search was coming from recommendations, right? Like, hey, if you bought this, you might also like this, right? So that was definitely the first triumph, and it's moved into other areas. So legal has experienced a huge amount of input from generative AI, right? So the experts say that, if you ask for information on ChatGPT, the results of that are sort of the equivalent of a first-year law associate putting information together. So, and of course, law associates in their first year cost way more than ChatGPT, so you kind of have to question where the field is going, right? There was a really interesting scenario back in last year, actually, in 2023, where an attorney used ChatGPT to generate a brief, citing all these different precedents to support his client's position. And it looked awesome, like there are all these old cases that, set the precedent. Well, it turned out, when the judge started examining it, that actually 6 of those supposed cases were actually completely made up by ChatGPT. So that was, a hallucination. So that's just like a beware type of factor. They completely fabricated based on previous sets of data. So that, of course, it's in its scariest form, right? But just sort of, beware of that. Medicine, we're seeing, huge advances in cancer and pathology and such. Like back in the day, if you had to have a biopsy or something like that, right? You had to rely on the person's experience. So if you were lucky, your pathologist had, maybe thousands of samples that they had looked at. Right now, there's a company called Page AI that has harnessed the power of computer vision, and they can reference billions and billions of data sets to actually guide diagnosis. So I think that's definitely in the areas of medicine. It's definitely going to help patients and such for better outcomes. And then the human mimicry part, so you guys all know ChatGPT, of course. It's a large language model, so which gets trained. The more data it gets, the better and better it performs. So, and again, it's kind of rolling into the human mimicry, image generation, content generation, et cetera. So I'm not going to go into the last human consciousness because I think there's a little bit more work kind of before we get there. But I think, again, I'm going to pepper this presentation with quotes from Dr. Lee, but I think a really huge one for me is, she said, technology and AI will be what we make it. So really a call to all of you to really be engaged. It's not just going to happen. We're going to shape it. We have to shape it. So now grounding us back into ergonomics, right? So what is, so what? For all of us here, we're here for an ergonomics conference, not an AI conference. I think our greatest exposure in ergonomics has been computer vision, right? I think, there's some vendors here today, right? There's Tamiki and Inseer, and, they're exhibiting their products, and, computer vision basically is just it takes the ability, the observational ability that we have, and it translates it to just an automated fashion, right? To make our jobs a little bit easier. So we've seen these, I call digital ergonomics assessments, so they're called different things. This is my general term for them. So, we've got those 2 vendors, we've got some other leading vendors, right, like Velocity, like 3Motion AI, et cetera. Oh, I forgot, 3Motion AI was here too. Sorry, if you're here in the room, I apologize. So you're seeing a lot of these different, really vendors put their systems together, but they're really primarily being used for risk identification, right? So that is their main focus. A lot of them are putting in, of course, AI-suggested controls, right? So some of those are referencing old, existing, very traditional, proven data, like the old recommendations in the Kodak book and all that. Some of them are starting to use Gen AI, which means they're recommending things based on previous solutions and such. So again, sort of exciting and also perplexing at the same time. Are you going to get a good thing, or are you going to get maybe trash, right? So again, just different things to consider. There is so much data that is being generated by these systems. You can put in, upload a video. You can have every single type of ergonomics assessment completed, before and after. You have, angles. You have, some of the acceleration. You've got so much. Yet, My biggest pet peeve is that we're channeling all that information into like old tools, like tools from like 30, 40 years ago, or even more, like Rebuzz and even Nash lifting equation and all that. We're taking all of that and we're channeling it into those tools. Those tools were developed when we didn't have these capabilities of gathering data, right? So we really need to work on that to move forward and really develop new tools based on all the data that's being collected. And some companies are definitely doing that. And if you can get involved in their validation efforts to see what we can do with all this data that's being generated, that's really the path forward. But also, can we do better? Again, we're looking at forces and postures and things like that. There are other things that are important with MSD formation and development, right? Loading, your internal loading, right? Not just the external loading, which is what we capture when we take a force gauge and we measure a force, or when we actually weigh a box, right? It's like the internal loading, right? That's important. Your range of motion, velocities, acceleration, your muscle fatigue. That you can do with EMG, but you can't really do with computer vision systems. So again, as we develop these systems, can we do better in integrating more and more information? There's lots of body-worn sensors out there. There's some images of some here, from strong arm to Xsense, et cetera. I'm probably most familiar with strong arm. We did a trial when I was at Toyota for some conveyance operations. But again, being aware of all the different types of data that they capture, can these be somehow aligned with those other computer vision systems to generate even better models? Because right now I feel like it's one or the other. It's like, when do I use this versus that? And can they really work in unison? And I think some companies are definitely thinking about that and putting them all together. So what does all this mean? Digital twins. I think you know what that concept is. It's the ability to project a digital image of, not just humans, but machines and everything, that sort of digital copy. And I asked myself, so what, right? There's all this data, we're capturing all this stuff. We're gonna have at our fingertips, every single person in this room, everything is gonna be somewhere in terms of your digital everything, right? But that's really about the risk part, so what, right? So what are we gonna do about it once you identify the risk? I think, and what I've experienced in my 23 years of being an ergonomist, is that the focus is a lot on risk identification. We love to talk about risk identification, all sorts of tools, and we debate that tool's not as good as this tool, and if we only had a good tool, we would solve everything. I've heard that discussion time and time again. We like to dwell on that because I think it's a little bit easier, right? Than actually solving a lot of the problems. I've been to a lot of sites, especially with my work at Liberty Mutual, where they were doing everything right, especially distribution centers. They were doing everything right from a physical standpoint, but at the end of the day, they were lifting, So it's what can they do, right? So those controls, they're really difficult to develop, right? Things are really difficult to develop. You can't just get an off-the-shelf item in a lot of areas. So, what are we doing about the risk management? And I've always said, the risk management is the real reason we do the risk identification, right? Although we like to dwell on the risk idea a little too much, in my opinion. But what's happening from the AI world? Well, we're starting to see some smart recommendation engines, right, within these computer vision systems, hey, try this. They're a little bit general right now, right? So, if you have a bad lift, your NIOSH lifting equation, the lifting index is a little too high, they're gonna be okay, raise it up to your elbow height, that type of thing. They're not gonna say, okay, get the specific equipment and tie it to your machine and it's gonna do this, this, and that. So they're general, but they can be a little bit more specific as we go along. And like I said earlier, we need to just ask, where are these ideas coming from, right? Are they sound ideas? Or are they being generated based on, Gen AI, possible, not good. So it could be inaccurate. There's the potential for misinformation, right? So I won't name any names, but I have lately in the last year or so come along some portals that, some web-based portals that claim to be AI-driven engines to figure out which exoskeleton and such you should be able to trial or implement, et cetera, based on characteristics. And I think I'm pretty knowledgeable regarding the exoskeleton industry, so putting in different parameters and the results that I have personally seen, I'm no. Like, like why is it actually giving out that information, right? It's not appropriate, right? And again, I think some of these are turning out to be more paid advertising portals. So like different vendors that are actually paying for their name to be in there. So it's not a comprehensive report. So again, things to watch out for, right, in terms of AI. And then I think the other, in line with that, the issue that we may have in the future is, the word AI may become the new ergonomic. Like, the ergonomists will sympathize with this, right? Ergonomic, what does that mean, right? A lot of times, like especially in the office furniture industry, the ergonomic mouse based on no data at all, right? Or like ergonomic this, ergonomic that. It's become sort of a buzzword, right? So AI, again, has the potential to do the same. So exoskeletons. You guys know I love my exoskeletons. And again, as I explained earlier, I kind of got into got into technology really through exos. So exos, I think, are going to really, advance forward, especially with AI. I don't think they're the next back belt. Start to address something that was brought up earlier this week. So the back belt, unfortunately, was sort of a misapplication of something that might be effective in the fitness or bodybuilding industry, and then certainly applied to occupational scenarios, and really keeps the back rigid. It keeps you in a so-called good posture, and sometimes actually creates some abdominal stress, cardiovascular stress. Doesn't provide any mechanical offloading at all, right? So definitely keep that in mind. Exoskeletons are different. They actually do reduce torque around the joint in question, reduce loading, et cetera. So really they're not the same. AI is being used to drive exoskeleton development and design, so which I don't know about you, but I've never seen an AI back belt before. So I think these things they fit on the body, so I think that's their similarity, but they're definitely going to drive differently. So medical exoskeletons, they were there first, right? They drove a lot of the advances and such that we see today in the occupational exoskeletons, and they're advancing even more. So this was, if you were watching, this was all over LinkedIn this summer with the Olympics. So it's French Paralympian Kevin Piet. I'm sure I'm killing his last name because he's French, but he's a tennis player. He hasn't really been able to walk for 11 years after a motorcycle accident, I believe. And he carried the Olympic torch using sort of this latest and greatest exoskeleton, the medical realm, by Wondercraft Adelante, which is very advanced, more so than others before, in terms of its ability to balance itself and all that, making it more usable. So this was really a cool sight to see. In terms of occupational exoskeletons, again, when I started out with the shoulder ones in 2017, and a lot of the other automotive folks started out, a lot of these, there's nothing wrong with passive, right? I think there's a lot of good advances that have happened today in terms of passive, but at the time they were a little bit uncomfortable with the shoulder. Like when you were up, it was great, but then when you brought the arms down, right, it wasn't great. So that created some issues. But I think they're definitely improving and morphing and such, particularly with the use of AI in terms of learning movement patterns and such, and really helping to provide active, smart support. So a couple of really great examples today, right? You've got your German Bionic, Apogee, Verve Motion. I don't know if Verve is here. I didn't know you were going to be at this event, but I did submit these slides a while ago. But Verve, I think, is not to spotlight them, but I think they're really, to me personally, they're a great advancement. I remember when I first met their CEO in 2018, and right, Verve they were still connected to the Harvard Wyss Institute, and they were just thinking about developing soft exosuits, right? So at the time, Toyota, when I was at Toyota, I really had made it a playground for exoskeleton developers and producers. It was like, hey, if you're interested in trialing your product, we had one plant set aside, the plant in Kentucky, and it was like a playground. Like, come in, give it to the team members, let them test it, let them give you feedback, see what it's good for, see what it's not good for. Verve was one of these. And it was interesting because then we kind of lost touch a little bit for a while. And then earlier this year, I was on a business trip in Boston. I was able to go to their Cambridge office. And it's like a real, office, with like 50 employees. And it was just like so amazing to me. And again, not to toot my horn, but it's to show you the power of allowing early stage developers to come into your workplace and tweak their products, test their products on employees and such. That development that can happen when you get engaged, that is really amazing. And I would really encourage you to do that more and more. We're starting to see more exoskeletons for return to work, right? So the Iron Hand, which was previously known as BioServo, but I think recently it was sold off to Skelex, which is another company based in Europe, right? So they've had this hand exoskeleton that, again, got a chance to trial at Toyota, and we were using it to prevent injuries, but again, the question was brought up in terms of people coming back after carpal tunnel surgery and such. It is AI driven. It has artificial tendons that are then powered by AI to understand movement patterns. So basically make this glove more comfortable for the user to actually wear for extended periods of time. So again, I think that'll be a key area of AI to really help a lot of these systems feel more comfortable. I saw this Japet W Plus when I went to the WearCon conference in Europe, in Germany last year. So they are supporting a return to work for the back. So, back pain and such, they're specifically saying, no, it's not a prevention tool. It's something you wear when you come back into the workplace and you're recovering from a back injury. It is actually a medical device as per ISO. So it's sort of like, it was kind of like an intriguing one because I hadn't really seen that before. And it was kind of interesting how these are being applied, because I think return to work has been like a touchy area, at least in the US, applying some of these devices to return to work. There's a little bit of being scared to do that, right? And instead focusing on the healthy employees to keep them from having injuries, right? But I guess, low back pain being so prevalent, right? So probably a lot of people have it and aren't technically injured as per being on workers' comp and such. And we're starting to see more and more personal usage exoskeletons. So I'll mention Roam Robotics. They were honestly like a pioneer. So I first met them in 2018. They were being funded by the Toyota research fund or something like that. And they came to one of the plants, and they were talking about their knee exoskeletons, but they wanted to bypass the occupational route altogether and go into like the skiing market and such. And I thought they were so interesting because they were not taking the usual route, right? And I think now they have sort of pivoted into more medical assistive areas just because maybe the skiing market wasn't quite there. But they were sort of a pioneer in terms of, thinking that way. Now today you see a Kickstarter project. It's actually a Kickstarter project for Dance's exoskeleton. I think that's how you pronounce it, for hiking. And if you go on YouTube, there's all these really cool videos about people hiking with this. And I think this really needs to be the path forward in terms of not really sports, but the elderly support. Like my mother-in-law she's had 2 knee surgeries. She can barely walk, right? Like for long periods of time. But these devices, they're not quite there yet in terms of, just easy put on, take off type of usage, right? So where are we going with these? These are the potential to not just help workers, but also, the disabled, the elderly, et cetera, in the future. More problem solving, so collaborative robots. So these are the ones that, we've seen a lot of videos online, I'm sure. The ones that hand you coffee while you're, like putting, clips on some sort of work surface or something. So these are really developing and such, and I think everything is gonna have their place in the workplace. We're gonna be talking about in the future, like, okay, here's the potential controls. Do you use an exoskeleton? Use a cobot? Do you use another type of robotic? Do you use traditional robotics? Do you use, maybe a humanoid robot? So these, I know they look a little scary, but this is an area that is really taking off right now. I mean, it's crazy when you start digging into it, all the stuff that's going on in terms of humanoids. And again, my point here is just to give you a quick glimpse of what this will look like. I think Alan shared some of this yesterday too, but humanoid robots are gonna grow and proliferate. So everything is becoming cheaper to produce. Manufacturing capabilities are becoming easier. So just enhanced AI powering it. So the market is going to grow. So this is Goldman Sachs data. There's lots of data sets out there, but they're projecting this to be a $38 billion market by 2035, which is crazy, right? So these are going to start appearing, and I know some places where they're already starting to trial. I'll show you a little bit. So here, I'm going to show you like a few videos in terms of what is developing in the area of humanoid robots. So this first one I'll show you is the new Atlas by Boston Dynamics. So again, this is just off YouTube. So again, there was the old Atlas, or just Atlas. That was like the new updated Atlas. So this is pretty cool. Kind of show you how it moves. And this was just unveiled in April 2024. So very recent. Why move like a human when you don't have to, right? So, and again, this is building on other legacy robots from Boston Dynamics, right? Such as Spot, the inspection robot, and Big Dog. If you guys have seen like Big Dog, it's the one that kind of shown to navigate the rough terrain. That's always like pretty cool to see in action. So again, they're kind of building on this with advancing AI. Tesla. Right, so Tesla, Elon Musk he's basically using the same systems that he's used in the vehicles for the autonomous driving into these robots, right? So there was a Bumblebee at one point, but now the focus is on Optimus. So this is the one that's, really taking off. So he's basically, Elon has always wanted, and again, I've worked with Tesla people in the past when I was with Toyota, but I think Elon's dream has always been to build his cars, like robots to build his cars, right? And it hasn't quite happened yet, but I think his dream is really that. And really beyond that, from what I've read in the news and such, is that the cars are not really his thing. Like, it's more the robotics and the AI and such that is really gonna drive the future. The cars are just sort of like a vehicle for all that to happen. And he's one of those visionaries. He's also working on another chat GPT-like system called Grok 2 that is going to be, or I think maybe it has appeared already on X, formerly known as Twitter. So again, he's one of those that's really kind of driving the area. But he's really banking on this Optimus to take off. So here I've got like a training video for Optimus, and it's pretty cool. So with the Cybertruck in the background, of course. So super cool stuff, and it's got good music that they can dance to, so that's awesome. But again, it's just and I think that they're gonna need to move a little faster and all that to actually be able to do anything more human related. But again, you can see that it's happening and it's evolving and how they're training it. So they're mirroring humans' capabilities, right? So it's pretty interesting seeing that develop. So which leads me to Figure. So Figure, this is another humanoid robot. I think it's the most beautiful humanoid robot ever. So in terms of its anthropomorphic form. So the founders of Figure, so they're basically wanting to develop this humanoid that can do anything and everything that a person, that a worker can do. So that is sort of their dream as compared to like more narrow focused robotics. So, and it's actually in trial right now. Again, this is another way that you can really support all of this emerging market by actually engaging in a trial with these developers, right? So, you know, my friends over, again, from the automotive world, the folks at BMW, they're actually trialing Figure. So, and here is a video of what they're doing with Figure in Body Weld Shop. So just so you know, this is a simulation, but this actually happens in welds. So you weld parts together little by little, and it becomes like it starts off as not heavy, becomes heavier and heavier as you move along. So it is sometimes a problem. And this video was just released very recently, within the last couple of months. So it's pretty exciting to see kind of what's happening in that area. So we're being introduced to this term, RAS, Robot as a Service. You're all familiar with SaaS, right? RAS is the new thing, right? It's giving us the ability to trial robots while still funding those robotics companies that are creating those humanoids. RoboFab. Look this up, this is real. World's first factory for humanoid digits, which is another humanoid robot that particularly Amazon's gonna be trialing or using in their warehouses. So it is a dedicated plant in Oregon that's going to produce digits. And they're estimating 10,000 digits annually. And they're building this right now. So, and it is close to completion. So this stuff is really taking off. Which of course, you know, all brings us to, you know, is this the future, right? Is that what's gonna come out of the RoboFab, right? You got some Arnold going on, right? But, so we all think of that, right? Particularly like the Gen Xers like me, like, you know, like watch Terminator and all that back in the day, right? This is like almost like coming like true. It's kind of crazy, you know? And I think the Terminator is probably an example of what's coming next. So like, you know, we talked about AI, but there's, you know, beyond AI, which they call AGI, so artificial general intelligence, right? That could possibly surpass humans, right? There's a company that's already working on this. There's a few companies, but this one in particular sticks out, Singularity Net. They're launching a worldwide network of supercomputers designed to host and basically create AGI. And why do you think it's called Singularity Net? Because singularity is the point at which humans and robotics or AI are basically indistinguishable or actually surpass humans. So it's on its way, right? It's happening now. So what is that gonna lead to, right? So what's gonna be the impact of all this stuff to us, right? Alan touched upon this yesterday, right? What's gonna be the role of us, the ergonomist, right? What are we gonna do, right? Are we gonna be needed? Are workers even gonna be needed, right? Because that's what we do, we watch workers, sort of, so are we gonna even need anybody to watch workers? Are we gonna lose our abilities? Are we gonna like not know the evaluation tools anymore because we have all these digital tools to rely on? Will there be future ergonomists? A lot of these things we need to work on, right? Impact on jobs from robotics, so robots may put people out of work, but you know, I think generally we think this is such an awful thing, but I have seen so many jobs in my career where people shouldn't even be doing that in the first place, right? So again, like where do you draw the line? Because you know they're gonna get hurt, like absolutely, because it's so bad, you know, so where do you draw the line in terms of where to put these in and where you don't, right? South Korea, interestingly enough, they actually introduced a robot tax already in 2017. And it's not a direct tax, it's more like a reduction of tax benefits that companies were previously enjoying when they were implementing robotics. And it's not really this wonderful, you know, empathetic thing they're doing. They're just really trying to generate more revenue, right? Because if you have less workers, you have less to tax, right? Because you tax people, right? And companies, but they've introduced this robot tax, which is like an interesting concept. And then, for all of us, right, could we get a robot tax too, right? So like you could argue that by using a lot of these computer vision tools to to assess ergonomics, right? That might put some ergonomists out of a job, right? So what's a robot, right? I think it's a poorly defined term that we all think of very differently. But at the same time, imagine the great possibilities of AI, right? So sifting through ergonomics controls, creating new items and such, I think it's gonna be wonderful to have all those items at our fingertip, right? So think of, some examples that I was able to think of. So Gen AI, right? Asking some type of system, how do I prevent injury to John, who works in weld on this process, right? Personalized ergonomics are gonna be possible, right? Not just like, let's fix this job, but actually let's create some good impact to John, right? Or, give me proven solutions to ensure good ROI, right? We're always focused around ROI. So this is one, imagine you could just ask something and out pops information, good information. Create a solution, right, with the additive manufacturing. You heard that keynote yesterday, right? That we'll be able to maybe even create something for me right now to actually solve this concern, right? But whatever we do, we really need to be centered on humans. So again, kind of drawing back on Dr. Lee's advice, I'll read this off. So the AI revolution must remember its origins. The restless imagination of an otherwise unremarkable species of hominid, so mystified by its own nature that it now seeks to recreate it in silicon. This revolution must therefore be unequivocally human-centered. And I think that's how, towards the end of her book, that's really what she focuses on in terms of, she's pioneered so much of this stuff, but we need to remain human-centered. So in that vein, beyond the physical. So another item that I've noticed in my career is that we focus very much on the physical, right? We all know there's psychosocial stuff and personal stuff, but I think the challenge is that we don't know what to do about it necessarily, right? Stress, how do we reduce stress in the workplace, right? When you're still bringing it from the home, right? So historically, there's really a focus on the physical risk factors, right? And there's still a focus on the physical risk factors, but can we really make this better and go beyond the physical? So I started putting this presentation together when I was still at Liberty Mutual. So we need to keep some things in mind. So this is information from 2004. Liberty Mutual puts their index together each year to show conditions in terms of the workplace. Look at the number one injury, overexertion, $13.2 billion, 2004. Fast forward, 2024, their latest safety index looks a little different, but look what is exactly the same. Overexertion, number one. Are we doing the right things, right? And the safety index goes even further back. But again, are we focusing on the right things? Because we seem to get, no matter what we do, we keep getting the same issues, right? How much is physical, right? We need to ask ourselves that. I heard this talk in Applied Ergo conference in March, and this kind of blew my mind because this was a researcher from NIOSH, and he was actually talking, someone who's focused on physical risk factors. He was talking about this study by Punet in 2005 that was actually considered a pretty good review, EPI review. And she actually found that only 37% of low back pain was attributable to physical risk factors. So, and again, this was on average. So there were some studies that had way higher number and some that had even a lower number. So are we looking at the right things? Maybe, right? And I think maybe AI can help us as well, right? There's, affective computing, so it's more like the emotion AI. I think it's gonna help us possibly with the stress and making a lot of these systems a little bit tuned in more to humans and such. MIT is really leading the way here. This type of effective computing, interpreting emotions and such is being used more and more in, smartphones and even automobiles, et cetera. So it's really gonna help us moving forward. Companion AI. You may have seen some of these, I think, two main areas, right? Companion robots. So Japan has been really, really huge in this area in terms of aging population, right? Probably the best one is Pepper from SoftBank Robotics that you see pictured here on the bottom. Very affable, likable character that you commonly see in in Japan, like greeting, corporate locations, greeting people, greeting visitors and stuff. It's kind of like a fun thing, but it's actually used as a companion robot. And then you've got companion AI. So this is something you can go to now. It's called Replica. That's probably the best known one. And it's basically a chatbot that you can interact with. You can download it right now for a fee. And it basically learns your texting patterns. You can even talk to it and such. It's sort of like talking to yourself almost, right? And we tend to like ourselves, right? So I think, but it's not just a fun thing. Like they've actually done some studies saying that people who are possibly lonely actually do benefit from these companion AI chatbots. Like it can actually reduce depression, loneliness, even suicidal tendencies. They've done some studies in that area. So again, it's I think this is also possibly going to help us in terms of the stress reduction and the psychosocial angle. Coming towards the end here, but let's see, a little bit over here, but just remind you, no matter who you are or where you came from, you belong here. Let's build a future together. So really wise words from Dr. Lee in terms of where this is going. So how to prepare, again, just keep a positive mindset. I think that would be my biggest advice. Remember that we're well beyond robots and AI, right? We're humans, the physical touch, that compassion. It's going to take a really long time for robots to be there. Adaptation is paramount, so look for basic things that you want to get rid of, right? Like, I hate expense reports. Like, when I go back, can I have something where I'm just like, hey, fix it all for me, right? Like, something like that. Just focus on tasks that you would love to sort of get out of your life through AI. If all else fails, keep in mind that you can actually clone yourself, like clone the ergonomist, right? So there's a bunch of different companies, but there's one, Second Self, that you can actually create your AI clone with, showing your mannerisms, the way you talk, your expertise, and all that stuff. That's actually, you can get in line to have this done right now. So, if all else fails, we can clone ourselves and have that remnant. This is another really great quote from Dr. Lee. So, I've seen many worlds as a daughter, a scientist, an immigrant, but the most important world is the one that I will never live in, the world that will be built on everything I'm doing now, right? And I think, that's critical for us to understand that it may not be in our generation, but it's coming, right? So I definitely think of, these are my two kids. I think of that and all the work that I'm doing now and all this stuff, how it's gonna benefit, their world and such. I'm choosing to be a techno-optimist, versus a techno-pessimist, right? I think, right? So that's definitely a choice you need to make for yourself, certainly, but I think the former will lead to better output. So it's gonna be really, really tough. It's gonna be a lot of questions, a lot of fear, concerns, development, and all that. But I think really, the fact that I'm here today, right? I gave you my backgrounds, the fact that immigrant, psychology major, totally non-techie, here today giving you a keynote on ergonomics and artificial intelligence on her birthday, at National Ergonomics Conference. I think really anything will be possible. So thank you.